Yeah, I know. Obviously, that opening sequence was fake, but I thought it might grab your attention, and it's basically the idea of what these parts from Palette can do from you, and that's what we're going to be talking today is the Palette kit and how I've been using it to integrate, especially with Capture One and Photoshop. Now, I've been thinking for a while about how to kind of best to do this video to show you all of the things that this kit can do, but I've actually come to the decision that I'm not going to. I will show you a few things that this can do specifically just to give you an idea, but I think that with the incredible depth of functions that you can go in and set and customize, and the different programs that you can use this with, the different combinations of parts of sliders and knobs and buttons, the different configurations that you can organize them in, all of those different things make this a really personal experience, and nothing that I could show you would really effectively help you to get this to a point where it's going to be beneficial for your workflow. I'll admit that I myself am still kind of getting into it and trying to figure out how best to utilize this, and there's no doubt that this will, or it does have the potential to speed up your workflow or to make things easier or more accurate in your adjustments. But it definitely does take a bit of time to get used to, just because there's so much to it. I mean, that makes it very powerful, but it also means you're not going to just pick this up and be right out of the gate ready to go with it. It reminds me of the experience I had when I first got my Intuos tablet with the pen where you can actually draw on there. And I use that for retouching, especially for portraits and stuff. And at first I really was kind of disappointed when I got it, not because it didn't work well, but just because it was overwhelming to start from zero again. You know, I had gotten so used to doing things with a keyboard and a mouse. When I started to use the Intuos tablet with, you know, the button on the pen and all the different buttons on the actual tablet itself, it was just kind of like starting from zero, and I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I was lost. I didn't know how to set things up in a way that really helped me to speed up my retouching process. But you know, after time I got used to it, and in the end it's something that I think I can't really go without. I can't go back to doing that without the Intuos tablet. And I think that these parts from Palette kind of follow that same pattern, where it's going to take you a little bit of time to really figure out what setup works best for you, what combination of buttons and functions work best for you, just to explore all of the different things that it can do to set up some different profiles. But I think that after you can get through that phase, this is going to be something that has a lot of power to it, where it can really speed up your workflow. It can make things more accurate for you to make these adjustments more accurately than you can with, you know, a mouse, for example. And you can do, you know, some really interesting things that might be more tricky with, you know, some combination of keys, and you can cycle through different profiles, whereas with keyboard you just have to remember a ton of shortcuts. With this, it's fewer buttons, fewer knobs, but you can switch between purpose-made profiles for editing, for culling, for color grading, whatever it is, for retouching portraits, to a different user profile for retouching landscapes. So I think it has a lot of power, but at the same time it's going to be very personal, and it's going to take you a little bit of time to get used to. So yes, I'm calling this a review, but I think I more so just want to discuss the system itself, because I mean, there's not really that much to review. There are little metal boxes that are made well with buttons and sliders that work well, physically speaking. The software is really deep in what it has, but it's easy to use, easy to install, easy to follow, easy to set up. You just, you know, you have your different profiles for different programs that you load into there, and once it's loaded, it's good to go. It'll automatically switch between them as you change programs, and you can just, you know, select a button to switch between user profiles within one program, and it will do that. I mean, it's very easy to use. The software and the hardware, there's no problems there whatsoever. So there's not really much to review on that aspect, but I just want to discuss it as an idea, as a product, as something that you could or could not integrate well into your workflow. Two points I want to discuss about that is the price and the necessity of something like this. The price is not cheap, and I think that's going to be a big stepping stone for a lot of people. Is it worth it or is it not? I mean, it's stylish, it looks cool, and it's very simple. And I think simplicity is its biggest strong point. It can do a lot, but in a very simple way. It kind of takes all the complexity out of, you know, things like all of the different hotkeys and so on. I know there are more complex, you know, keyboards or different work panels that you can use that do a similar thing to this, but the simplicity of the Palette system is really, I think, its strongest point. Combined with the fact that obviously it still has a lot of power to it, and you can expand it. You can, you know, use a minimal set, or you can expand it to as complex of a set as you want with any combination of dials and sliders and buttons. So I think there's a lot of flexibility to it, but it is not cheap. So I think you're paying for, the physical build quality and just the smoothness of the design. It's like paying for a Mac or an iPhone because, the sleekness of it, the simplicity of it, and just how it just works. And that's a big part of it, I think. You shouldn't have to be fiddling with something like this. With these, you just snap them on, assign the profile you want, and you're good to go. Is it worth your money? Well, I think that just depends on how big your budget is. I mean, you can say that for anything. Is a $5,000 TV worth your money? I don't know. Do you have $5,000? And how much do you appreciate the small differences between a $5,000 and a $1,000 TV? Same for cameras, same for lenses and everything. Yeah, a kit lens can get the job done, but there's reasons that people spend thousands and thousands of dollars on more expensive lenses. So price is a relative term, and that brings me on to necessity. So is this necessary for you? And I think, again, there's going to be two groups of people. One group of people that do this as a hobby, and they aren't wasting necessarily huge amounts of time on things like culling through thousands of pictures or really in-depth photo editing work or anything like that. And for those people, no, it's not going to be anything that really is beneficial to you because you don't have that immense workflow that you have to simplify, or that huge range of things that you're doing with your photos that you want to make into a more streamlined process. But if you're a wedding photographer or an event photographer, if you're somebody who just has a lot of work that you have to get through and you want to cut down on time, you want to make things simpler and more streamlined, then I think that absolutely, yeah, this is going to be beneficial for you. So like I said, I do want to show you just a little bit of how this works. So let's hop over to the computer and take a look at some of the detailed things about what this can do. Just show you the interface of the software and show you how these buttons can interact a little bit with things like Capture One and Photoshop. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at how these buttons and dials work, how the software works, how you can get things programmed in there, and how to get it set up, the basics. And then we'll take a look at a couple of different functions that I want to highlight just to show you some examples of how these can speed up or improve your workflow. So first of all, you want to install the Palette software, which I have right here. This is the Palette App 2. And you open that, it'll bring you to this main interface here, which you can see exactly how your buttons are laid out. So if you switch things up, if you remove one of them, for example, it will react on screen, and as you reattach it, or if you reattach it in a different position, it will respond accordingly. So let me see if I can just squish this over here. And there it is. So it actually is very, very reactive. So you can set this up exactly how you want. And if you move things around, sorry as I'm struggling to do this here, if you move things around, it will react exactly to that. And just as a note, when you do move things around, whatever you have set to that particular unit is going to follow it wherever you position it. And they each have their own inbuilt IDs. So this controller unit can see the ID of that particular unit no matter where it's placed. So whatever you have this set to, if you decide to move it, it will carry over that function. Of course, all of that will be shown here, so you don't have to remember what these things are set to. You can see it right on screen, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. But this is the basic interface that you'll get on your computer. You can see here there are several tabs in this, and I have two open right now. I have the Capture One editing tab, which I have set up with some of the functions that I use more often, and I also have a browse tab for Chrome set up. But you can go in here, click the plus, and set up another profile for a number of programs. Today we're going to stick to some of the basics, Capture One and Photoshop, for example. But if I wanted to go ahead and create another Capture One profile, I can do that. I can create one more. You can create several for each program, and then you can go in and label them, double click on the name, and say this is retouching here, and this next one after that is going to be for, let's say, color. And you can reset them, and you can program all of these different buttons and dials to things that are more specific to each phase of your workflow. What that means is that you don't have to have an unlimited number of buttons and dials to be able to have a lot of functionality here, because you can set up different profiles within the same program for different steps in your workflow and just program the buttons and dials that you have, no matter how few, accordingly. When you create a new profile, something that you'll notice is in pretty much all of the profiles is this next profile button, and this is a very handy one. Of course, you can reprogram it if you want to, but I do recommend keeping at least one button designated for this function, because what you can do, like I have three or four Capture One tabs or profiles set up right now. If I press that button, it will cycle through those, and if you have multiple programs, like right now I do have Capture One and Chrome tabs set up, but this is going to only cycle through those that you are currently using. And if you have, I don't have any windows open right now, but if you do have, for example, a Capture One window open, and then you switch over to Photoshop, this will automatically jump over into your Photoshop set of profiles. So that's very reactive and very effortless on your part. And just having this button here to switch through those different sets of settings, sets of functions that you have set, is really, really quick and easy to do. If you're like me, your memory is terrible and you're not going to remember what all of these things are set to. So holding down that next profile button will also bring up this on-screen display to remind you of everything that you have set in the current selected profile. So now if I switch over to the next one, for example, it will reflect the settings that I have set for that particular profile. So at any time, if you can't remember what you have programmed to a certain button or dial or slider, hold that down for a second or two and it will pop up on screen right for you, let it go and it's gone. So that's very, very good to have, at least for me. It's just a really great way to, again, be able to have a number of different things set here without having to stress your memory to remember what is set to what. And that's something that you can't really do very easily for hotkeys. So each of these three different types are going to have some different abilities. Sliders will slide, and that's pretty much it. And we're going to talk about that more as we get into an actual program in just a minute. These dials here, you can of course turn them, and they're unlimited in their turning. You can press them, and you can also press and turn them for 3 different functionalities, and you can have those all set to there at one time. And again, we'll take a look in just a minute as to how you can get these set up. The buttons, you can of course press them, or in some cases you can hold them, and some of these functionalities are going to depend on what specifically you have set to it. Some things will be available to set to only a dial or only a slider, and so on, and this will vary again from program to program as well, but it's pretty deep. I'm not going to even attempt to go into that in extreme detail today, but just be aware that this is, kind of reactive to what program you have in it and what function you're trying to set to what particular type of module here. To set a certain function to a certain module, you'll just click on it in this window here. So for example, if I wanted to set one of these sliders here, you can just click on it and you can see all of the different things that you can set here. And under vignetting, for example, and under some of these different menus, you'll have different options. For example, your exposure settings, you can choose between exposure, contrast, brightness, and saturation. If I go into brightness and click advanced, you can see that you can also set a range for these sliders, and that's where accuracy comes into play. You don't have to always deal with extreme 0, or in this case -50, all the way up to +50. If you only ever adjust your brightness from, say, 0 to 35, for example, you can now set that brightness slider, hit enter, you can now set that brightness slider to just only the range of 0 to 35. So that means that within this physical range of the slider, you're now going to have more fine control over those settings, because instead of -50 all the way to 50 and having all of those ranges squeezed into this same physical size of a slider, you're going to now only have 0 to 35, which is your useful range, the range that you typically work with. So for some of these settings, you're not always going to be using the whole range of those sliders. You're going to stick within a certain range, and that allows you to get a lot more accuracy with these sliders than you can get with just the interface in a mouse, for example. You can also then set the color of the module itself. So you have this kind of little LED around the outside of it, and you can set whatever color, and you can see how it reacts. It actually gets set to that color as you do it. And that can just be a little reminder if you have some kind of color coding for different types of settings, that you always set exposure settings to pink, for example. You can have that little reminder. Of course, you can still bring that up on screen right here using that next profile button like we talked about. Sometimes that color can be a little bit of a reminder as well. In this window, you also have Mac mode, and depending on, again, the function or the module that you're using, the button, the dial, or the slider, you'll have some different options here as well, and we'll see that as we go through to the different types of modules. You can also set the custom name here. So for example, if I wanted to say brightness 0 to 35, just as a reminder, a more specific reminder, then you can do that, and you can see right here this name was changed. Click done, and now also as we bring this up on screen, you can see in your on-screen display that name is reflected right here. So if you want to set more specific names just to remind you more specifically maybe some of the customization that you've put into this button or slider, you can do that as well. Taking a look at one of these dials here, we'll jump into this, and you see we have more options on the left side here, but the top one is always going to be your app specific options. So you can see here all of the different things that you can set for these dials. So let's say, for example, we look at rotation and flip. You can choose your angle, and then when you jump into advanced, you can adjust the sensitivity. So this is going to be how fast it reacts as you turn it. So that's useful to have as well. And again, that will give you a higher level of control because you can set this very low, and every movement you make will only make minute adjustments, or you can set it really high and it will have a faster reactivity. So you can kind of customize that to how you feel is right. And I found that just depends on the setting. Rotation, for example, might be something you want a little bit higher. I found maybe around the 75% range, but some other settings you might want to put a little bit lower, depending on how fine of adjustments you typically make with that particular setting. If I go back into white balance, let's select Kelvin and tint, for example, and a lot of these will have some information here. For example, it says turn to adjust Kelvin, press and turn to adjust tint, press to reset white balance mode to shot, which is your basic out of camera white balance. And again, you can adjust the sensitivity here, but what that will do for you is just like it says, if you turn it, just simply turn it, that will adjust your Kelvin. And if you push and turn it, that will adjust your tint. So you kind of have more than one function built into only one module, which is really, really useful. If you press it once, that will then reset that for you. So you can go back, and pretty much all of these things that you can set to these dials, if you just push it, it will reset, which is a useful thing to have. You can also go into keyboard mode, and you have three options here. You have right turn, left turn, and dial press. So you can do this just with your keyboard settings. So for example, if I want a right turn of this dial to be, let's say, Command C for copy, and then I want the left turn to be Command V for paste, then you can just set that right there with your keyboard. Then dial press, you can set to one more function. So you can really, really customize this very deeply. And again, these dials are really, really nice because you have three options for how you can customize this, and you can set that to any combination of hotkeys that you have set on your computer. Mac mode will again give you some options that are more system-wide, like your volume or playback or brightness, things like that, mouse scrolling and so on. And then function switching will give you the ability to set this to cycle your profiles instead. Looking at the buttons here, you have more of the same, and you do have also this Capture One 11 menu options, actions, and you can see here, right here, they explain exactly what that means. So I haven't really messed with this too deep. I'm not going to show you too in-depth. Like I said, I've already gone more in-depth than I intended to. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of specific things in the app with the app itself open. Alright, so now we're in Capture One, and with both Capture One and Photoshop, pretty much all of the things that you could imagine might be able to be mapped to one of these buttons or dials or sliders pretty much can. So I want to focus on just showing a couple of things that I think are interesting. One, because I think it gives you a lot of control in a really cool way that you can't really do any other way, not exactly to this same extent anyway. And one that I just want to highlight as being one of my only complaints, or one of the only, I think, drawbacks to this system. So the ways that you can control this color balance section here, I think, are pretty cool. So what I want to do is set up three profiles for this color balance here. I want to set up one for my shadows, one for my midtones, and one for my highlight. And then I'm going to set a dial and two sliders to control each of these different aspects of these things individually. So for example, in Capture One, if you don't know, you have this color balance section where, for example, I'm in shadows now. I can go ahead and change the color of my shadows. And this is not the most precise control here. So you can kind of swing it around to get the color that you want, and then you can adjust the saturation on the side here, and then you can adjust the brightness on the side here as well. But it's limited in its control, and I think that you get a lot more control over these in a lot more of a fine-tuned type of way. And we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So let's reset this, and I'll bring it back into my three-way view here just so you can see exactly what's going on. Jumping into the palette app here, we're going to add three profiles real quick. One for Capture One again, and then Capture One, and then Capture One. I'm going to rename these into my shadows, mids, and highlights. Let's just say high for now. And then what I'm going to do, I'm not going to worry too much about all these other ones. I'm not going to bother just deleting the settings on them. But what I want to do here is to go into one of these dials. I'm going to set this one right here. And I want to go down to my color balance, and I'm in my shadows now, so I'm going to take a look at shadow hue, and I'm going to leave it at that for now. We can adjust that sensitivity later, or however you want to. I'm going to click done, and I'm going to go into my slider, my first slider, again color balance. I'm going to go into my shadow saturation, and then I'm just going to, without closing this window, click on my other slider, go into color balance, and choose my shadow lightness. So now I have all three of those aspects of my shadows here mapped to separate controls, physically speaking here. So for example, here you can see, possibly as that little wheel on the side here, I'll just open up the larger shadow view here. You can see the hue going all around here as I spin this. So also I can take this slider and now go from 0 to 100. And again, you could fine tune this a bit more. You could limit that range, for example, from here to here. If you want more fine tune control and you're not going to bring it all the way up to 100, you can go ahead and limit that range as well, like we talked about before. And then my final is the lightness here. So you can kind of raise or lower your shadows using that slider right there. So let's go ahead and reset everything. If you click again, it will reset. That's the hue. These you do have to slide back to 0 actually, but the hue itself will reset, which on the right here is the standard position for the hue. Quickly going into the mids and highs tabs here and doing the same thing, but for my mids and highs, we'll get a different profile for each of these different controls here for shadows, mids, and highs. It's pretty obvious, I think, but. Okay, so now I have my 3 profiles set up for my shadows, mids, and highs with the same controls set to this dial and these 2 sliders, just separate for the shadows, mids, and highs. Again, what I don't have set here for some reason is my next profile button. I want to make sure that I have that set. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that is set to my next profile in each of these. There it is. It's in there now. Next profile, next profile, next profile. I don't know why that was reset there, but we want to make sure that we have that so we can cycle through each of these shadows, mids, and highs, and then it will go back, of course, through my editing tab here as well. But we can cycle through those without having to come back to this actual interface each time. So now I can cycle through, again, my shadows, mids, and highs. You can see on the bottom of the screen which one is active. You can also see it on the device here itself. It will show you which profile you're currently using. And let's go ahead and just mess with the image a little bit using these controls. So this isn't necessarily like an amazing result here, but you can see how I can, with pretty nice level of accuracy there, go in and dial in my hue, saturation, and brightness for each of those independently, and cycle between them and get some cool color grading going here relatively quickly. And then of course, once you get something you like, you could just copy and paste that over to another profile, which incidentally you could also set to some of these buttons, copy and paste. So this is going to be a very, very quick and very high level of control for some color grading right inside of Capture One Pro with these buttons, dials, and just different profiles set up for different tasks. What you may or may not have noticed though is that of course the software itself doesn't take control of these sliders. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch over into my standard editing profile here just to show you an example of this, and switch over to my main tab here with my exposure settings and whatnot, just to bring up an example on screen. A reminder on screen of what I have set. This is my highlight recovery, my shadow recovery. I'm going to show you my shadow recovery here just to exemplify what I'm talking about here. And right now, if I slide this, it will adjust my shadow recovery. And you can maybe see what just happened there. And just as a note, I have my shadow recovery set from 0 to 15 at the moment. So that is the extent of the range that I can adjust here. And before it was on 80. So for example, if I bring it up to 80 again, as I move the slider, it jumps down to where it is. So if I have it on 15 and then I manually adjust it to 8, as I start sliding it again, it's going to jump up to 15 because that's where this physically is. So that'll also apply if you are going between photos. So if I make my adjustments here, for example, bring it down to 0, and then I go to my next photo, as I slide that, it's going to go back to where it was. So this physical position, if you just switch and you don't touch anything, it's not going to mess that up. But if you switch to a new photo and then you go ahead and slide these, it's going to jump to the setting that is at, physically speaking. So be aware of that. That is one of the limitations of this and one of the bigger annoyances, but maybe one of the few. Like I said, in Photoshop, it's pretty much the same. Like I said, the things that you imagine you could probably program to these is pretty much what you can program to these. And again, keep in mind that, some of these have different functions. For example, you can push this to reset some things, or, you can actually push this and let me show you this here. I have my top right dial set to brightness. So if I adjust my brightness here, it goes, at this speed. But if I push it and go, it'll do a lot coarser adjustments. So, you can get your rough adjustment here, and then you can let it go to get more fine-tuned adjustment there. So you can have that kind of double function to just one of these dials, which is really, really nice. And some of the things that I found more useful in Photoshop, for example, is changing the size of the brush either with a slider or with one of these dials here. You can switch back and forth, for example, between your default colors if you're doing dodging and burning. For example, both of those things could work together, changing your brush size or changing your brush size and your brush hardness, as well as switching back and forth between your black and white default colors, for example. Those are going to be very useful things to have. And for me, I find that with just using the hotkeys on the keyboard, a lot of the time I might accidentally hit something I didn't mean to, and then it takes me a minute to figure out what I did and to undo that. But with these, you don't have that possibility quite as much to accidentally hit the wrong button because, there's a limited amount of buttons here compared to the number of keys on a keyboard. In terms of value, in terms of quality, everything here, I found that the software is, bug-free. The hardware is really, really rugged and nicely made. The price is the only thing that's going to be a little bit hard to swallow for some people, but again, if you want something cheaper, then go for something cheaper. Maybe it will last, maybe it won't. Maybe the software will work well, maybe it won't. Maybe it will actually help you, maybe it won't. But I can say that if you take the time to get to know these palette kits, it is really going to work well. The software, the hardware, all of it is really well made, and it does have a lot of power to it. So it's just going to be a matter of time, and I can guarantee you that it will be money well spent if you take the time to get to know it. If you have any questions or comments though, please do let me know down below, and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. If you like this video or find it helpful, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe to see more in the future, and hit the little bell icon to get notifications when new content is uploaded. As always, thank you for watching.